The Claresholm and District Museum is a community history museum located in southwest Alberta, Canada. A welcoming destination, the museum offers visitors and residents the opportunity to explore the region's Western Canadian heritage. This is one of the best small-town museums you will come across. Claresholm looked much different in the years past. Today, the museum grounds include a 1912 CPR train station, an 8,000 square foot exhibit hall, Claresholm's first schoolhouse from 1903, a 1920s log cabin, and a CPR caboose. Museum exhibits tell stories from pre-contact Blackfoot cultures to the arrival of the railway and prairie homesteading, and then the growth of the town to Canadians' women's rights and the British Commonwealth Air Training Plant Service flying training schools, to NATO flying training schools, as well as thousands of artifacts, documents, and photographs. Let's take a walk outside and inside this fabulous museum. We just took a quick peek at the Canadian Pacific Railroad caboose. It appears this one was last on the rails in the 1970s. This log cabin is an original structure dating back to the 1920s. It was built by Bard Kritoff in Willow Creek, which is a few miles south of Claresholm. It is actually a pretty big cabin for the time. There is a washing machine, a double bed in the corner, some cupboards and shelving, and some tables and chairs. Here is a photograph of the cabin from the early days. In the center of the cabin is the stove. It was used as a cooking stove and a heating device. Outside we see Highway 2 and the traffic going north and south, but this used to be a very different view. This photo from 1907 shows Claresholm as a typical western prairie town. There are some original buildings in town, but it just doesn't look the same anymore. And here is the original one-room schoolhouse. Claresholm's original one-room school, built in January of 1903 on land a couple blocks east of the station, was donated to the museum and relocated here in 1967. This small school served Claresholm for just a few years. Claresholm grew rapidly, from one family in 1901 to about 800 people in 1905, and a much larger school was soon needed. In 1907, the new Claresholm Public School was completed on 2nd Street West and 55th Ave. It was an impressive 3-story brick building with 2 floors of classrooms and an auditorium on the 3rd floor. The little one-room school was then sold to the Prairiesville School District and moved to a site 18 miles northeast of Claresholm. It served as the Prairieville School until 1939. Like all rural schools, it was also used by the community for church services and as a community hall. And now we're going to enter the exhibit hall. This is a really impressive museum for such a small town. Let's take a walk through the exhibits. The museum guides you through history, starting first with the Native American tribe known as the Blackfoot. Here we can see headdresses, clothing, tools, and various artifacts from the Blackfoot. Next up, we see an assortment of different animals that inhabit the prairie land around Claresholm. Here we see the cowboy culture of ranching both cows and horses. There is good evidence that Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, better known as the Sundance Kid, an outlaw and member of the Butch Cassidy Wild Bunch of the American Old West, was a cowboy in this area in real life. But he didn't stick around, probably because of these guys, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP. As we go through the museum, it is sectioned off to show how the town grew and what livelihoods were conducted long ago. It also showcases various backgrounds of Europeans who settled this area. This replica storefront is filled with artifacts and antiques to show what the early settlers would be purchasing to survive and thrive. This old cash register was a beautiful instrument. Many of these artifacts are original to the early settlers of Claresholm, and each tell a story. Religion and church services was a huge part in holding faith, as the early settlers faced many difficulties. These displays are absolutely fantastic. This takes one back to see what a kitchen would look like from years past. Here is a typical children's room and the master bedroom. That's a funny little wooden seat, isn't it? And the parlor with table, books, and a record player. No Netflix or YouTube back then. Here is the telephone operator and the switch station. A nice collection of early town advertising. And a newspaper office with printing press. Claresholm and the area was essential to the war efforts during both World War I and World War II, as we can see by these artifacts. Men were drafted and volunteered from the local population, joining the Army, the Navy, and the Air Corps, and sacrificing so much. Claresholm was a hub for training pilots and airmen during both World War I and World War II, and even into the Cold War. It held a large air training base that helped win the wars for Canada. The museum holds many interesting and one-of-a-kind artifacts that are coupled together with personal histories from the town itself. This section showcases the automobile and larger artifacts, starting with this old bus. But oh no, they fooled us into going to the dentist. None of this looks like much fun. And now an old hospital room and health equipment. In this old bus, you faced each other so that you could converse with each other. Not like that anymore. People would rather bury their heads in their cell phones. These are some great examples of very, very early automobiles. Here is a hat shop and a place to pick up a fancy dress. This back section of the museum showcases an antique fire truck and equipment, as well as some farming instruments. All this walking got us hungry, so we ended up getting a quick lunch. I hope you enjoyed our little walk, and thanks for dropping by. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel to see more interesting walks around Alberta. Thank you and take care.